You're about to know the top 5 best opening traps in the King's Indian defense, which is one of the most popular chess openings of all. On top of that, I'm going to cover the common attacking patterns, common ideas of this opening, and let's go ahead and get started. The King's Indian defense arises from black answering with a kingside fianchetto against white's moves such as pawn d4 or c4 or knight to f3. For example, if we use the most common opening sequence, in most cases white goes e4 to grab the center, black goes d6 to cover up that square, and here we got the main line of the King's Indian. Now white develops, and one of the common errors for white here is to play bishop d3. And at first sight, it's totally unclear why would this natural developing move would be a wrong move. But we gotta understand the fundamental idea of the King's Indian defense, and one of them is putting pressure to this d4 pawn thanks to our fianchettoed bishop. And you can reinforce that pressure by bringing your knight out here to c6. We can also play bishop g4 and neutralize this knight on f3. Sometimes we can even strike in the center with our pawn break, pawn to e5, and as you can see we have really a lot to bring to the table and attack that weakness on d4. And by putting the bishop to d3, it interferes with the queen, which no longer guards this pawn, and that is why it is wrong for white. Anyway, at this point they have no idea what's going on here, but we're going to follow our plan. We play bishop g4 first to eliminate this defender so that it's easier for us to attack this pawn on d4 later. They play h3, we trade, and then we play knight c6, and now we already effectively attack this pawn. This is one of the simplest plans of the King's Indian defense, and I really love that. Now, what can white do? In most cases, they try to defend it. If they push forward, we'll talk about that in a moment, you can go knight e5 with this fork to the queen and bishop, and that is fine. Even better is usually to land your knight on d4 to this really strong square, and later you can solidify it either with one of your pawns. Anyway, that's good stuff, we'll talk about that in a second. In most cases, they try to keep their pawn chain intact, they play bishop e3. Now we play knight to d7, opening up the diagonal for our bishop, and therefore renewing the threat to this pawn. If they try to defend it once more, here there is a really interesting move that black can play. By the way, interestingly enough, in this game, the white player is about 2200, the black player is 2400. It is an over-the-board game, not a blitz game, and black missed the shot, which is knight to e5. Pretty cool stuff. This is a fork to the queen and bishop, but at first it looks like, wait a second, then just drops the knight. Not really, because after knight takes e5, we renew the same fork, and this time the queen has to go, and after that knight takes d3, really wins the game. Queen should go here, queen f4 would actually allow you to end the game with the royal fork, queen g3 is better, but black still wins, knight d3 check, then you can grab the other pawn, and also threaten this pawn, you can play c5, queen a5 check, and it's very easy for black to win here. Let's go back to the main line of the King's Indian defense. We talked about the fact that bishop d3 is in fact wrong, the main move is bishop e2, and now we still execute the very same plan. We play bishop g4 to eliminate this knight. After that, after he castles, there is also a tricky move, knight f to d7. Now, that's not the main variation of the King's Indian defense, but I love that for its simplicity. And we have this clear plan of putting pressure to this pawn on d4. Now, usually at some point they will play pawn h3, but we don't mind. We actually were going to take there at some point anyway, so they rather waste time there. And after this trade, you then go knight c6, attacking this pawn twice, therefore they need to do something. If they defend it, this time it's not as easy for us to increase the pressure because he's got the queen there. That's why we said that it's nice for them to have the queen defending this pawn. But we can still break open the center with pawn e5. Basically winning the battle over these central squares. If he goes forward, we don't have to back down, we can go forward with knight to d4, putting this knight right in the middle of his position, making it very uncomfortable. We control so many squares. Moreover, we can actually reinforce this knight if we want to with one more pawn after pawn c5. So at some point he'll probably wish to take it, but now we have this nasty pawn on d4, we kick his knight away. Also, we open up the diagonal for our bishop. The knight has to go. After this, there are different ways to go about this. You could defend this pawn just by playing queen f6, but I love the move d3, which is a little bit trickier. We open the diagonal for our bishop. After he takes, we take here on b2 and attack the rook after he goes. Looks like he actually outsmarted us because now you have to drop the bishop back, but then he can win the pawn on b7, or at least he thinks so, but that is actually a trap because after knight to c5, you fork his queen and rook, therefore winning the game. But the truth is, even if white does not fall for this trap, you have a great position anyway with this monstrous bishop, great knight on c5, and life's good. What if you're facing an experienced opponent and he really knows your plan and he does his very best to solidify this d4 pawn? Therefore he plays h3 to never let you bring the bishop out. After that he goes bishop e3 to protect this pawn. Then as you bring your knight out, he goes knight f3, and now he says, you know what? I did more than enough to protect this pawn and you never go there. But guess what you do? You play e5, attacking this pawn. If he lets you capture there, that's pretty cool. You're going to open up the diagonal for your bishop, as well as the e-file for your rook, and that's pretty nice. In most cases, they'll try to play d5, hoping for your knight to go back, but we don't. We play knight d4. At first, this looks like a miscalculation, because he can just take there and win a pawn, or he thinks so, but here comes the boom, knight takes e4. We use the fact that he's underdeveloped and his king is still in the middle of the board, and therefore we can have these tactical opportunities along the e-file. Moreover, after knight takes e4, the following variation is really beautiful and pretty unique. I don't think I've ever seen exactly this kind of tactical pattern. You win by playing queen h4. Not really win, but you got a great position here. And you utilize this pinning along the fourth rank, as well as possibly the pin along the e-file. And it's really difficult for white to handle that. So if the knight goes somewhere, you're going to win the bishop here on d4, because you'll be attacking it twice. And if he tries to trade, then of course you don't take here, you play this in-between check. You grab a knight with a check. And he must cover with a queen, go into this approximately equal endgame, but it feels more natural for him to cover with the bishop, hoping to castle. But then you trick him once again. You don't take the bishop. Instead, you take here on g2, and you attack the rook. That's the trick. You're going to grab the rook with a check, and if he guards the rook, only then you finally, kindly enough, get back your bishop, while his position is totally ruined. Now we know that if he captures this knight, we have this fancy move queen h4, putting pressure along the fourth rank. What if instead he takes here on g7? Once again, what helps us is this nice in-between move. Instead of capturing, we play rook e8. And what we have here is this discovered check that is coming. If he tries to move the bishop away, then after knight takes c3, we attack the queen, but we also put his king in check, therefore we're going to win the queen and win the game. He can't do that. That's the really nice trick. Therefore, instead, he'll have to play something more casual, such as bishop e2. And then you have time to capture this bishop, and what you did here is you just destroyed his center, and you got an active position for your pieces. Queen to d4 is not a problem, because you can cover, forcing him to trade. Then you also threaten to take here and ruin his pawn structure. If he trades, no problem, you have an active rook. And although objectively it's about equal position, but actually you're the one putting pressure, white needs to be careful. Your king is also placed pretty well. In some endgame positions you can even go forward and attack his pawns. But not for now. For now you just want to play bishop d7, rook e8, and you still have a great position. Another common way for white to play it is the so-called Sämisch variation, where they play pawn f3 followed by bishop e3. And their idea here is that they really solidify their center, and they're also ready to expand on the king side. For example, let's say we go e5, they can close the center, then a5 is one of the common ideas, stopping the white pawn from going there, and therefore ensuring the c5 square for your knight. So after he goes, let's say queen d2, you can go knight a6 and reposition your knight to a nice square. But the white plan could be to play bishop h6, trade off the defender of your king, and then rush with the pawns forward, h4, h5, and really checkmate you along the h-file. Kind of like they do against the dragon variation of the Sicilian defense. And the plan is dangerous if you don't know how to deal with this, but there is also one tactical trap that your opponents will often overlook. In this position, there is a very unexpected move, knight takes e4. All of a sudden you sacrifice your knight on the seemingly best defended square of your opponent's position. But the trick is, after he takes it, you then have this queen h4 double attack to the king and bishop. Therefore, on the next move after whatever, you're going to grab this bishop, and you won this pawn on e4, plus you grabbed his bishop. And if you look at this position, this bishop on h6 is really huge. It's rather an elephant. It controls everything here. You can put it to e3 and take over like completely the position. You're going to play f5, kick this knight away, grab the center, then bring your knight either to c5 or b4. So you have an extra pawn and overall a far superior position. Your opponent may also choose to play the so-called 4 pawns attack. If anyone knows why it's called that way, please let me know in comments below. Just kidding. Anyway, so against these 4 pawns attack, you want a castle, and after knight f3, there is an interesting move, knight to a6. At first, that looks like a beginner's mistake. You put your knight on the ream, where it is dim, and why don't you put it to the center of the board? But in fact, there is an idea. Garry Kasparov played it, as well as some other GMs. We know that down the road, white often moves the pawn forward, and then our knight lands to this great square on c5. That's the point. Also from here, maybe you are ready to support the c5 break. But the main idea is to still play pawn e5. Nevertheless, looks like white made their very best to prevent this move from happening, and yet you do play it. So what the heck is going on here? There's a very interesting idea here. After the trade, Now, they can certainly win this pawn. Now, they don't want to split up their pawns, because after that, you're going to trade queens, forcing one of their pieces to go back. Then you're going to go knight g4, and this pawn is weak. You're going to get it back easily, and you destroy their center. Their position is weak. Life's good for you. So let's take it back. They probably do not want that. But how about knight takes e5? Then it looks like white just wins a pawn for nothing. What do you do then? Well, while advancing all these pawns forward, they overextend their position a little bit, because they don't have sufficient development and sufficient defense of this expanded territory. Therefore, we want to counter-strike and make use of those advanced pawns without sufficient defense. So play pawn c5 to take away this pawn now, and after d5, looks like white is in control, but then knight takes e4. Our sniper bishop from g7 often does a great job, and that is a discovered attack. We get our pawn back, and on the next move we are ready to maybe play rook e8 and put pressure here. If he castles, we can bring the queen out and also double attack these weaknesses, and maybe white can hold, but anyway you have a very nice attacking position. In reality, the most played move by white is pawn d5. They want to keep this 9-pawn chain, but now we can land our knight to c5 and attack this pawn twice, therefore they need to defend it. They do this by playing queen c2. They think that the pawn is defended, but as always, we keep ignoring him and we sack the knight right there. You see, there is this common theme in the King's Indian defense. We'll let him build up that pawn center, but then we attack it vigorously. And quite often we can seize the initiative that way and start all kinds of tactical attacks. So after knight takes e4 and take, we then play bishop f5. And thanks to this pin, we're hoping to get our knight back and to win a pawn. Now, if he defends it that way, then we trade and play f5. And once again, there is no way out for white. Now, they should actually take here. If not, they're going to lose this bishop for nothing. And going back is not good because you've got e4. You can probably first trade on d3, then play e4. You open up the position, attack his king, and that's bad for them. So bishop takes f5 seems like an optimal decision for white, so that at least they get a pawn for their bishop. And after rook takes f5 and white castles, looks like they safely put their king to a usual position and things are under control for white. But that's a false impression, because after e4 you really win the game. Now this knight is attacked, it can go forward. Remember, we've got our powerful bishop controlling this square, we've got our queen controlling this diagonal. This forces the knight to go back, and then we've got bishop d4 check to the king. The king has to move. By the way, that's why white had to keep the knight here, so that at least it guards the rook. But now we play queen f6, and we just keep bringing up pieces, and after the trade, yeah, you're not threatening mate in 1, but his pieces got stuck on the other side of the board. He cannot untangle them, really. He can't move this knight away, because it has to cover this f1 square. If the knight moves, queen f1 is going to be checkmate in 1. But if he doesn't move the knight, you're going to play rook f8 and queen f1 anyway, or you'll bring the knight right here to d3 and f2 check. So it's very easy for you to win because your opponent is completely defenseless. Now, today we focused on the traps rather, but if you want to know how to play the King's Indian defense effectively and the right plan of doing so, check out this video. It shows a clear and simple path to play it without knowing a lot of theory.